Hey, and welcome back to J.P.'s World of Wrestling. I am your man, J.P. I am back. It feels like forever. But it really hasn't been that long, but it feels like it's been that long. Just a quick update. I am well into my new job. So far, it's going pretty good. And it's going well, I must say. And it looks like the schedule that I'm going to be on will allow me to continue bringing you this content. So today we continue on with the Mattel Retros. We are almost done, but yeah, I'm going to do this video. Then in the next one, I'll sort of bring the Mattel Retros to a close. But today I'm going to talk about three different figures. I'm going to break them down individually, but I'm going to combine them all into one video. So today we're talking about the nWo. New World Order. That's right, we're talking about the nWo. And we're going to start with this guy because you all know my feelings about this particular figure. So I'm not going to go into that again. But, so we'll just talk about this figure. This is 6, as he was known in WCW. But before he was known as 6 in WCW, he was known as the 1-2-3 Kid in the WWF. Now, what happened to make this guy a big star is that on a Monday Night Raw, he had been wrestling every week under a different name. You know, the Lightning Kid, the Cannonball Kid, or just the Kid. But then one night, before Raw, Scott Hall, also known as Razor Ramon, told Vince McMahon or somebody, he said, hey, what if this kid were to beat me tonight? And they all thought, well, that's pretty interesting. That could be something. So in a match, 6 kind of came off the top rope with a moonsault, landed on Razor Ramon, got a 1-2-3, won the match. You have to remember, at this point, he's pretty much an enhancement talent. So he beats Razor Ramon, and from then on, his career skyrockets, and he becomes like a big name in the WWF at the time. Which is good, because at the time, WWF really didn't have a lot of huge stars. They just didn't, And I've been watching 1995 WWF, and I'll go into that in a little bit future video. Like, I'll wait a little bit in the future to go over that 1995 WWF, and I'll give you the reason why I started watching 1995 WWF. But nevertheless, so ultimately, the 1-2-3 Kid became friends with Razor Ramon. And the two of them were, kind of hung out, and he would be in the corner of Razor, Razor would be in his corner. But then after a while, the 1-2-3 Kid turned on Razor and became a heel. And he joined the $1 Million Corporation. And then he was in the $1 Million Corporation for a while. But then, him and DiBiase both kind of jumped ship, WCW. And immediately, they changed his name to 6, and he joined the nWo. Now, I think they changed his name to 6 because 6 is the equivalent of 1, 2, and 3. As if to say, we've got the 1-2-3 Kid, but he's 6. So anyway, he joined the nWo. He joined his buddies, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. They were both those guys and him were kind of really good friends in the WWF. And the only two that were missing from the group was Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Shawn Michaels. They were both all known as the Clique. But nevertheless, 6 joins the nWo. And he becomes a crucial part of the nWo during those early days. And then he eventually left WCW. He went back to the WWF, this time during the Attitude Era. This time right after Shawn Michaels kind of parted ways with the WWF. He went into kind of retirement to let his back heal up. So Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, decided to keep the D-Generation X thing going with the New Age Outlaws and this guy. He brought him out, and everybody's like, "Oh man, it's the 1-2-3 Kid," but no, he's like, "No, this is X-Pac, as in DX, Pac, X-Pac." So he had a really, really, really successful run in the WWF as X-Pac, but then he eventually left the WWF and started doing indie shows, and now he, makes an appearance every now and again. But he's still out there. He's still plugging away. But I was like X-Pac 6, 1-2-3 Kid, whatever you call him, which is why this figure was kind of a disappointment. But nevertheless, I already said I'm not going into that. But 6. So now the next guy I'm going to talk about was kind of the initial guy in the nWo, because he was like kind of the first guy from the nWo to make an appearance in WCW, and it's actually this guy, Scott Hall. Now this figure is not really very good, but it is what it is. So before Scott Hall went to WCW as an nWo member, he was in the WWF as Razor Ramon. But before that, he was in WCW as the Diamond Stud. And he was also in the AWA years ago as just Scott Hall, but he had like this cowboy mustache, and he had kind of this Western cowboy gimmick. But then he went to WCW, became the Diamond Stud, and was managed by Diamond Dallas Page. But then he left WCW. He came to the WWF and became Razor Ramon. Hey, yo, Chico. And I've heard Scott Hall say that the story behind the Razor Ramon character was that Vince was trying to come up with a character for him, and he couldn't think of anything. And he asked Scott Hall, "Can you think of anything?" Scott Hall was like, "Well, have you ever seen the movie Scarface?" Vince had not seen it, so he's like, "Oh, how about you call me Razor Ramon?" And Vince's like, "Oh, I love it. Yeah, we'll call you Razor Ramon. You're Razor Ramon." Now, Vince didn't realize that the razor part alluded to the razor used to cut the cocaine in the Scarface movies. But Vince didn't know that, but it became a really successful character. It became probably one of my favorite characters from the mid-90s in the WWF, because I liked Razor Ramon. I thought Razor was awesome. But then in 1996, he started getting tired of the way that the WWF was being run. He kind of got tired of the direction WWF was going. And plus, he was, the WWF business was kind of down, and he wasn't really getting paid as much as he'd like. But he got an offer from WCW. So then he went to Vince. He's like, "Look, if you can just match their offer, I'll stay. You don't even have to pay me more. If you can just be competitive with them." But at the time, WWF was doing poorly financially. So Vince is like, "I'm sorry, Scott, I can't do it." So Scott went to WCW. And so then in 1996, during a Monday Nitro, during a match, they're showing the match and everything, but in through the crowd, wearing all denim, wearing like a denim vest, jacket, and denim pants, jeans, and combat boots. He comes down from the audience, from the stands. He gets to the ring, beats up both guys in the ring, and then he gets on the microphone and says, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here." So then he starts going on and on and on. And then he tells Eric Bischoff, he's like, "In 2 weeks' time, I'm coming back, but I'm not coming back alone." So then him and the person that I'm going to talk about next, they come back and they start running amok. They start running amok in WCW. And now, well, I'll say that. So then the nWo, they start running amok. They start terrorizing all of the talent in WCW. And Scott Hall and the guy I'm talking about next, they kind of team up. And then, at this point, the nWo doesn't have a name. It's just these two guys at the time it looked like two guys from the WWF kind of invading WCW. But Eric Bischoff said on his podcast that his idea was initially two guys that had formerly worked for WCW, that had made a name for themselves elsewhere, and now they're back to seek revenge for the WCW firing them all those years ago. But whatever. So eventually, at Bash at the Beach, I mean, there was another pay-per-view. I think it was the Great American Bash, but these guys made an appearance, but their appearance consisted of powerbombing Eric Bischoff through some staging. But then at the next pay-per-view, Bash to the Beach, him and Kevin Nash said, well, we got a third guy, so we want you, WCW, to get three of your best guys. Get three of their best guys, and we'll beat them all at Bash to the Beach. So Lex Luger, Sting, and Macho Man stepped up and said, we'll take you guys on. So Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, well, I'll talk about in a minute, they team up, and they show up, and they're like, hey, where's your third guy? You promised us a third guy. And Kevin Nash just said, don't worry, he's here and he's ready. We got all we need right here. So then Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, they started wrestling. And then right before the match ended, that's when all heck broke loose. And that's kind of when the nWo officially began. And so Scott Hall was part of that. He had a very successful run in WCW as part of the nWo. At one point, though, he was in the nWo, but he wasn't. At one point, he was kind of a straight, because at one point the nWo split. And so Scott Hall at first was part of the black and white nWo, or initially he was part of the red and black nWo, then he was part of the black and white nWo, but both kind of rejected him, so he's kind of a loner nWo member, so he's kind of a lone wolf unto himself. But unfortunately, Scott Hall had a lot of issues in his personal life, and they were starting to manifest in his professional life. So Scott Hall, was in and out a lot of times. And so then WCW, after it was bought out, Scott Hall, his personal issues continued. And then in 2002, Vince McMahon decided to bring back the nWo. And Scott Hall was a big part of that. And they were actually going to continue going. But unfortunately, he had some difficulties in his life. And the nWo, they tried to continue it without Scott Hall. They tried to bring in Shawn Michaels, and they tried to bring in other guys, and it just didn't really work. So initially, the nWo thing got scrapped in the WWE. But anyway, Scott Hall, of course, he passed away. I think it was just last year, which was very, very sad, because, like I said, I always liked Scott Hall. Whether it was Scott Hall or Razor Ramon, I liked him. But after he came into WCW, this guy followed shortly after. Big sexy Kevin Nash. Now Nash is the one that came 2 weeks later, but he's the one that was kind of getting into Eric Bischoff's face and said, for 6 months you've been running your mouth. This is where the big boys play. Notice the adjective, play. We're not here to play. And so that's when they started wreaking havoc, and they started terrorizing all the talent. And that's when this guy, okay, I gotta back up because, okay, so this guy was in WCW before he went to WWF, but he was in WCW as, I think, two different gimmicks. He was Vinny Vegas and he was Oz, two gimmicks that were just kind of terrible. And so one day, Shawn Michaels was kind of watching WCW TV, and he saw this guy. And he called Vince, and he said, hey, we need to see if this guy can come to the WWF, and he'll kind of be my bodyguard. So the WWF called him and said, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I have a little bit left on my contract, but I might be able to get out of it. So he went to WCW executives and said, "Hey, I want out of my contract. I have an offer from the WWF." So they said, "Okay, sure, we'll give you a release." So then he went to WWF as Shawn Michaels' bodyguard, Diesel. So then they were kind of together for a bit, and then they kind of split up, and Diesel kind of broke out on his own. He became the Intercontinental Champion, and then he eventually became the WWF Champion by beating Bob Backlund in like record time at a Madison Garden house show. So then he became WWF Champion. He was WWF Champion, I think, for over a year until he was finally beat by Bret Hart. And then he got an offer from WCW. His contract was coming to an end, and he, I think, also asked Vince to pay him more. Vince said, "I can't do it," so he's like, "Okay, I'm going to WCW." So, but Vince said, "But if you could do me a favor and on your way out, could you put over the Undertaker?" And he said, "Absolutely, sure, I'll do that." So at WrestleMania 12, Diesel and Undertaker had a really great match together, but Undertaker was victorious. That's when he came to WCW. The whole him and Scott Hall thing, they got together, they started terrorizing. Great American Bash, Kevin Nash jackknife power bombed Eric Bischoff into some staging area, like right through the stage. So then they came back the next night on Monday Nitro, started talking, and they told WCW, get your three best guys together, and we'll beat him. And so WCW did, and that's when Bash at the Beach happened. These two tagged up, and for a while they were holding their own against Sting, Luger, and Macho, but Luger, early on in the match, got injured, and he had to be hauled away in a stretcher. So then it was just 2-on-2. But then eventually, towards the end of the match, that's when the big surprise happened. And that's when another individual came out. And that's where we're going to leave it right here. And we'll leave it right there till next time. And Joe, if you're watching, I know what you're thinking at this point. But anyway, that's going to do it for this video. The nWo Part 2 will continue on the next video. So for now, if you're new here, go ahead and like and subscribe. And I will see you next time.